Okay, all the doors in here are closed now. Quiet on set.
Okay, you're live.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Governance Committee meeting. It's been a long time since we've had a Governance Committee meeting, so welcome to our new member, Kim Roney, and actually Gwen Whistler is a new member of this committee. So, all new. This is funny, my script here that I'm supposed to read, so I have all the correct information, says good morning. Anyway, all right, good afternoon. So all council members who are participating and staff who are participating are obviously participating virtually. And to help our audience follow along, I'll state the section of the agenda we're on. Our agenda is not very long, so that will be easy. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 3405. So for those of you out there, welcome. For today's meeting, you will have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801. Meeting code 3405. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, callers will hear, for more options, please press star. Pressing *3 will allow callers to continue to listen live and join a speaker queue. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. So I will go through and introduce the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Please remember to keep your microphones muted if you are not speaking. Council and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good afternoon.
Councilwoman Gwen Whistler.
Hello.
Assistant City Manager Richard White.
Hello.
And City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay. So the first item on our agenda is to approve the minutes. Our minutes go all the way back to November 2019 because that's the last time this committee met. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from 2019, November 2019?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, do I have a second? Second. Thank you. Okay, now I'll do a roll call vote. Please say, when I say your name, please say aye to approve the minutes. Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
And myself, aye. The minutes have been approved. So the next item on our agenda is the legislative agenda. And this is something that we haven't adopted every year, but we sometimes try to do as we head into the legislative session. The North Carolina legislature has just convened and they are beginning their work. Their bill filing deadline is just around the corner. So we are quickly putting together a legislative agenda so that it will be in the hands of legislators prior to the bill filing deadlines. So, and I have had a chance to speak with some legislators. I believe they are all aware that this is happening right now, tonight at City Council. And so we are hopefully doing this in a timely manner. So what I'm going to do is turn it over to our City Attorney, Brad Branham, so that he can kind of walk us through the proposed legislative agenda. It was attached to the agenda. So for those of you out there, if you're listening, you can find it virtually. So let me turn it over to Brad.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the committee. The legislative agenda is something that we have not always done here in Asheville, but in years past, we have prepared one of these as a means to communicate to our local delegation about those items that the council has both interest and a general consensus in pursuing at a state legislative level. So this is absolutely not a comprehensive list of everything we could possibly be interested in, but generally speaking, are those items that we believe are of the highest priority and match up with council's goalposts for what we would like to see achieved, benefiting Asheville, either in terms of a general statewide bill or perhaps a local bill that may help us specifically with some of our primary priorities here. So I do want to go over with this group specifically what is included in the legislative agenda that will be presented to council later this evening. First on the list, and I'll just go in order, is a request for our legislature to reinstate what is often called the SMAP funding, and that is an acronym standing for the Restoration of State Maintenance Assistance Program. This particular state-funded program is fairly instrumental in providing significant levels of funding for local, primarily urban transportation systems. Extremely important and has been recently significantly defunded at the state level. We believe that puts public transit and transportation systems in a fair amount of jeopardy locally. Obviously, this is a priority for Asheville, and this is one of the large funding mechanisms from the state level that we believe would be instrumental in continuing to expand out the city's transit system. So we're not asking for anything more at this point than to refund what had already been done at previous levels. Secondarily, on the legislative agenda is a request also dealing specifically with transit. And this is a request to allow the city the authority to hold a referendum on the imposition of a city-specific 1/4 cent sales tax, the funds of which would be dedicated to transit. It is very, very common for the majority of the large transit systems throughout the state to be funded by a sales tax of this nature. And currently, state law allows for these taxes to be imposed following a referendum at a county level. This particular ask would be a little more specific and allow the city, just within Asheville's municipal limits, to ask our voters to approve or deny a transit tax of this nature. And before we can do that, we do have to have a local bill or potentially a general law allowing cities to do this sort of thing. So it would be a new option, but something that would not be so terribly different from what is currently going on at the county's levels throughout the state. The next item on the list is something that we have been working on and advocating for a while. Also, one of the elements of our Reimagining Public Safety campaign, which is an allowance to establish a local civilian oversight board specifically for law enforcement. These do exist in a few places currently in the state, but they are all done via local legislation allowing cities or counties to establish such a board. Currently, Asheville does not possess this authority, but we believe it would be an excellent step moving us again towards our continuing reimagining of public safety and fostering ongoing community input and oversight as well as transparency with our police department. The next item on the list is something that we've been dealing with now for a few years off and on, which is a request to reform the local occupancy tax. These are the funds that directly fund the Tourism Development Authority here in Asheville. And it's something that we believe two significant reforms could be made on, which would drastically improve, I think, the utilization of the funds that are collected. One would be to alter the amount of funds that are currently allocated specifically towards the advertising budget for the TDA as opposed to tourism-related projects. And in addition to this, a request to reform the allowance for which that remaining portion could be utilized for. At present, we're only allowed, with the TDA's approval, to spend those sort of funds on capital projects that advance tourism interest. And we believe advancing and expanding that world of potential expenditures would also be a tremendous assistance to the city. The next item on the agenda is more of a technical amendment, but as many people know, and as those watching can see, we're currently holding virtual meetings. Prior to the establishment of a state of emergency from the governor's office and some legislation that came out of General Assembly in conjunction with the state of emergency, was the allowance to hold these types of virtual public meetings. Prior to the declaration of emergency, that authority was not specified in North Carolina law. We believe it's been a highly effective tool under certain circumstances to be able to continue public business while still providing access to the public in the maximum extent possible. So we're asking for a clarification in the existing law to allow local municipalities, either throughout their own declarations of emergency or as they see fit, to continue to conduct virtual meetings. Finally, one more additional technical amendment. Again, this stems from one of the changes that we've dealt with during the COVID-19 pandemic, which involves the rules for voting following public hearings. Currently, there is a very disjointed process that requires meetings to occur, 2 meetings to occur before you can vote. This is actually contrary to all other items that public bodies currently vote on at the same meetings. We would still have the public hearing under this proposal. We would still accept all public input, but be able to actually vote at the same meeting, as has always been the case in the past and is currently the case for all other action items on the agenda. So those are the items that we've included on the proposed legislative agenda for this committee and later on council's consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee would have about this or the process. I will add that if approved, we will be affording it immediately to all the members of our local delegation and thanking them obviously for their service, but asking for their support in moving these initiatives forward through the General Assembly.
Okay, thanks, Brad. And this, if this passes out of this committee, it is scheduled to be heard on the agenda this tonight's City Council meeting, which is now less than 2 hours away. So are there any questions, comments? Yes, Gwen.
A couple questions. Brad, do we have any idea why the General Assembly did this legislation around public comments? I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of that. Like, did they think that people didn't have an opportunity to weigh in, or?
I'm a bit confused myself. Several city attorneys and county attorneys throughout the state have debated this. We've sought the counsel of the School of Government, as well as members with connections within the General Assembly. I believe there's the possibility that this could have been an oversight. This bill was put together very rapidly in order to respond to the pandemic and allow these types of public meetings to continue. But it does seem to be contradictory to the allowance to vote at the same meeting on all other agenda items.
Right.
So we believe that they wanted to allow for public comments, but quite frankly, many municipalities in the state are currently voting at the same meetings anyway. So we think that clarification on this item would help consistency throughout the state.
Okay. And then are we pretty sure that the county is not willing to try to float a sales tax referendum for transit? Are we moderately, because that really is the other option here. Yes, no, they're not.
We have not been able to
get
we've had discussions about it, but there has so far not been this has not been a priority for the county. Okay. And I think part of the problem for the county is that when we were talking about this over a year ago, we were on the heels of the scandal involving the AB Tech quarter cent sales tax. And I would offer there, the distinction here. The quarter cent sales tax used for AB Tech was actually, it was a statute that allowed a referendum on a quarter cent sales tax for the use of something, but it was somewhat open-ended and required the implementation of the county at their discretion. Really. Whereas what we're talking about here is a quarter cent sales tax for transit, and there are tight guidelines for how the money can be spent. It is not open-ended. A future council could not, at their discretion, change how the money was spent. It has to be spent not only on transit, but it has to be spent on transit services that enhance our current services. So we can't even use it to displace funding that we're currently using. So it would have to be dedicated to only providing increased transit services. It's a very narrow allowance. So, and that's not a problem for us because we have a transit master plan that calls for all kinds of enhancements to our transit services. And we think the estimate of how much money this would bring in would get pretty close to covering those expenditures, but not even all of that enhancement that's been planned for in our transit master plan.
Okay. And I think I probably know Senator Edwards has put in that suggested that any municipality that reduces its funding for its police department should be defunded in another area. Is there anything that we should put on our legislative agenda to kind of express our opposition to that? And I would hope that other cities would jump on that as an initiative, or is that just, poking the bear?
I mean, I certainly think we could add to this and add our, state our opposition to that legislation. And in addition to that, the League of Municipalities has already made some public statements about that legislation and their concerns about it. Also, its unintended consequences. It's obviously designed to punish cities who meet the definition. I think in Senator Edwards' mind, it's intended only to be targeted at cities who quote unquote defund the police. But in reality, there are municipalities that may have expenditures one year, like buying police vehicles, and then their budget's not as large the next year. And it may have the unintended consequence of punishing those cities as well, or cities that are suffering financially and their budgets are just atrophying naturally from smaller revenue sources. So I think we could add that, but I do want to make sure people know that the organizations that lobby on behalf of cities are also working hard on this issue. I spoke with Representative Brian Turner last night, and he believes that the leadership will probably bring that legislation forward for a vote. It may not be, go all the way to enactment, but it may be debated at least and considered for a floor vote. So let's add that.
I would just suggest that we add something along those lines. Just again that we're paying attention, and I think it's. As you indicate, since the league is also in agreement with us, I just think adding our name to it would help.
Kim, is that all right with you?
That sounds great. Yes, and thank you, Gwen, for bringing those issues as I think about what it means to be responsible for our tax dollars and to use them responsibly for core city services, including public safety in general. We have a responsibility here that our budget plans and policies meet the needs of our community, and the fact that one word might get in the way. I just think about a city that's like shrinking or changing to a different way of doing things might be affected. If we have a chance to stand with others, I think it's wise. I do have a couple other questions, but do we need to offer anything more to Brad for instruction on that before it can come to council tonight?
No, I think Brad, can you modify the document to add our opposition to it's Senate Bill 100?
Do you need a motion to approve this to move it forward to City Council, Brad?
Well, for the whole.
Yeah, for the whole.
Yeah.
Yes, and when we make that motion, just for our record, if we can include as part of the motion with the addition of a request to oppose Senate Bill 100.
Okay.
That sounds good. So before we make that motion, can I ask some questions about the rest of it? Okay. Let's go back to the restoration of state maintenance assistance programming. So I did some research to figure out what are some other groups in Western North Carolina that might be affected by this. And Henderson County with the Apple Country Transit System also relies on SMAP funding. So if we can go past a local bill and coordinate with our neighbors here in Western North Carolina, I think it'll have some greater strength. It's my understanding that some of this transit funding removal was in response to CARES Act funding coming in. but the CARES Act funding was meant to address an emergency situation, and this is for ongoing funding. So I'm not sure what the impact is on Henderson, but if we have a chance to coordinate efforts, I think that'll strengthen our argument. For the quarter-cent sales tax, I think it's important for us to stand with our new Senator Julie Mayfield. We might want to do the same thing with the SMAP and see if we can go beyond a local bill. So if there's a way to expand language around that for a quarter-cent sales tax for transit, I don't know if it's possible to go through the League of Municipalities or an organization like that, so that we can see if there are other cities seeking to do that. Because just for Asheville, being able to expand service, as we know, means being able to go ahead and do the fiscal year 2 of the Transit Master Plan so that South Asheville has more frequent service. It means expanding our hours of service, which is finishing up fiscal year 1, which means 30% of our routes that end at or before 7:30 p.m., we can cover those evening hours. And as a positive, this is a kind of tax that allows not just the people of Asheville, but our visitors, our tourists, folks who are coming in for health and human services, folks who come in for work, to participate in that solution. So it doesn't just put the burden on the folks who are paying property taxes. So I don't know if that looks like, I don't know if that means that we have language in it, but I wonder if we can package it and start like doing some outreach with other municipalities.
This is on the quarter-cent sales tax for transit. So this is one of the items that has been discussed at least by Metro mayors in the last couple of years, because it is desired by other cities across the state. And there has been discussion about whether we could try to get statewide legislation. That would be the goal, but there hasn't been movement on that. And quite frankly, we're kind of collateral damage in the big fight the legislature's having with the Triangle counties over light rail, which is, anyway, that's not our issue, but so I think that's been an impediment, but it's definitely an agenda item for the large metro cities across the state.
Okay, so I don't know if we want to have a step after that, but I would like for us to somehow pursue that. Maybe that's not our fight yet, but just for all of North Carolina, having a Green New Deal in a way to support people being able to move equitably without use of fossil fuels should be a good.
We could add to this legislative agenda that we generally, while we are asking for our own local bill, that we would also support statewide legislation that would make this a tool in the toolbox for.
Yes, that sounds great. Okay, so moving on to the authority for establishment of civilian oversight. I really appreciate the language that's used around civilian oversight. So I am recently aware of a coalition of North Carolina General Assembly representatives that may have coordinated a statewide legislation on draft for this a few years ago. I couldn't find any specifics, but I don't want us to miss the opportunity for a statewide bill. And part of this is the reason it's showing up so much in my comments today is because a lot of times we get singled out in Western North Carolina. And I think that we're missing an opportunity to build that coalition together. If it's already floating around, or if I can get some help finding out where that came from before. Ultimately, with public safety as a core service of the city of Asheville, this has to be more than just a sounding board for complaints after the fact, when we need to explicitly name that a civilian oversight board would have proactive opportunities to address things like policy. Maybe that looks like oversight of personnel records, hearings, review of body cam footage. It definitely, if possible, needs to be an independent body as opposed to advisory body, which we've already had now, and we're like running into the wall on that. So it does seem like civilian oversight is part of it, but if we can add some language around the oversight of policy and procedure, I think that would get to the spirit of my concern.
Thank you for those comments, Councilwoman Roney. Let me say also that with the legislative agenda, you're seeing just a very general overview without going too much into the details. But what we can say with regard to this particular item is My office has been working closely with numerous stakeholders over several months now, actually developing proposed specific bill language on this that we hope to be able to share in advance, with the goal of essentially trying to incorporate support and a coalition among multiple municipalities throughout the state in order to advance a general bill that would not be specific to Asheville, but would allow this authority to be provided to cities throughout the state if they chose to utilize it. And many of the tools that you're talking about are some of the very things that we are incorporating into this. I will say it is always a bit of a compromise because there are multiple groups that have interest in these things that we try to have a little bit of give and take. So you can't always request with some of these more difficult bills everything that you want. But we have, I think, made considerable headway with, I will commend some of the local police groups in their support to allow for expanded access to things like body cam footage, personnel records, in the review of some of the cases that would come before that body. And we hope to be able to expand that as much as possible with the goal of having a body with a true meaningful force behind it, and one that gives a certain amount of power and transparency to the community where we feel like would pay the biggest dividend for all sides concerned. So we are looking at some of those very things. The bill that you mentioned actually was floated several years ago. It did not make it very far through the General Assembly, but we actually used that as our starting point when we began drafting language that we thought would actually be an improvement over that bill, that is much more tailor-made to providing a greater deal of access to the board of some of the materials we think they would need to be able to make very good individual decisions as well as policy recommendations.
I think that bill was House Bill 193 in the 2015 session. That sounds right.
Well, in the spirit of taking pictures of your toddler when they're taking their first steps, this is a step, and I will take a picture of it and remember it. I also have one thing about the occupancy tax. So knowing that we have to move past the minimum of 33 to 66 split to the next step of a 50-50 split at minimum, because we're embarrassingly behind on addressing our infrastructure needs. For our residents, workers, and visitors, one would think that if the system and the city and the way to move around a city worked well for the people who lived and worked here, it would work even better for the people who visited here. But I think we also need to have something in here that addresses representation that's reflective of the people of Buncombe County. That could look like the art sector, food and beverage, hotel workers, homestay permit holders, and those with professional and lived experience outside of the industry. So I know right now we're looking for that broad statement of support, but are we going to see some language around the seating? Because I know there's talk about whether or not the city will have a say or just the county. But if we can support that that it should reflect the residents of the county, then maybe we'll get closer.
So that is certainly one of the other elements that has been publicly debated lately. And I'm happy to include that as an additional allowance to increase the requirements, or to expand the spectrum of those who could sit on the board away from just those people who are sort of directly owning a tourism or lodging business. And I think that that's certainly on the table if this commission, or this committee would like to recommend that addition.
I would like to see if it would have that sort of council consensus. So if it's possible to bring that out of this group, that would be welcome. And then the last thing I have is authority for electronic meetings, just because we've been rooting for this for a long time. I've been attending public meetings for 7 years now. And I just see how this increases not only accessible, equitable access for participation so that folks can provide input, but also for public service. I mean, we're talking about folks who need childcare and transportation, and also may have different limitations in mobility. I have served with 4 blind members of our community on the transit committee, and sometimes the ability to get to the meetings and back and forth was a barrier. So I'm really excited about that part. Thank you so much.
And if I could add very quickly on that, I think on this particular item, it's worth noting that I have been coordinating on this particular request with multiple cities around the state who are utilizing the same language in their legislative agendas as well. So we are not the only ones at the table who will be asking for this particular addition.
And moving us into the 21st century. So I'm happy to make a motion to submit this forward to council review.
Yeah, I would be glad for that. I just wanted to say, Kim, on the description of the additional board members for the TDA seats, I don't know if you want to just sort of generally express that we want to see broader community representation on the board and kind of leave it at that. I do know that earlier drafts last year before the pandemic that were being kicked around did add seats for, of course, all the board seats have a description that go with them, but I think it included short-term rental or people from the, who might be more on entertainment side. It was a different, it tried to broaden the representation to include a broader representation from the tourism economy.
And with the significant impact economically of our arts and entertainment sector, I think that makes sense.
Right.
Right. Arts and entertainment sector, food and beverage sector, and homestay permit holder.
Okay. You got that, Brad? Yeah, looks like it.
I believe so. Arts and entertainment, the services sector, as well as homestay.
Well, you should call it short-term rentals because in the county, they allow.
Could say homestay / short-term rental or whatever they.
And I would personally like to see a goal of it, of the membership reflecting the residents of Buncombe County. I feel like the thing is when we just are leaving it to an owning class that we're really leaving out some professional and lived experience at the table that could help to shift our narrative to like a more holistic perspective on how our occupancy taxes are spent. I don't know if that'll get through council with consensus, but it seems like just a genuine kindness and in the blandest statement possible that it would just reflect the residents of Buncombe County.
I believe I can craft some additional language and have that along with those other changes ready for council this evening.
Okay. So Brad, will you be providing kind of a marked up copy so that people can see what changed between what was on the agenda and what we're going to be voting on?
Absolutely. I'll provide that in sort of a red line style format so we can see what those additions are, and we'll have hopefully that ready in advance of the council meeting.
Okay. Well, with that, I would second Kim's motion.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. And do we have anyone in the queue that would like to speak on this item?
There is no one in the speaker queue.
Okay. And we did not receive any comments ahead of the meeting. But we do have people signed up to speak tonight when this item comes up on the agenda. All right. So with that, I'll just do a quick roll call vote. Councilwoman Roney?
Aye.
And Councilwoman Whistler?
Aye.
And then myself? Aye. Okay, so the next item on our agenda would be public comment, but if we don't have anyone in the speaker queue, and unless they joined us in the last 30 seconds, so I assume we don't, then I will close the speaker queue, close the public comment period. So that is it. Unless there's anything else, we are adjourned. Okay, all right. Thank you, everyone. Okay, bye.